He told everyone I was crazy. Not in those exact words, of course. He was too careful for that, too polished, too aware of how things sounded. What he actually said, in that calm and concerned voice he had perfected over years of being the reasonable one in every room, was that I was struggling, that I hadn't been myself since the baby came, that he was worried about me, that he was doing his best to support me through a very difficult time, and people believed him. Of course they believed him. He was charming and steady, and the kind of man who remembered everyone's birthday and shook hands with both hands and looked you directly in the eye when he spoke to you. He coached a youth soccer team on weekends. He brought homemade cookies to neighborhood meetings. He was, by every external measure, a good man, a devoted husband, a new father doing his best under trying circumstances. The trying circumstance being me. My name is Claire, and I need you to understand something before I go any further into this story. I was not having a breakdown. I was not unstable. I was not confused or irrational or disconnected from reality. I was 8 weeks postpartum, running on almost no sleep, healing from a difficult delivery, nursing a baby around the clock, and I had just discovered that my husband of 7 years had been sleeping with a woman from his office for at least 4 months. What I was experiencing was not a mental health crisis. It was a completely rational response to a genuinely devastating situation. The confusion between those two things is exactly what my husband was counting on. And for a while it worked. Let me take you back to the beginning of all of this, because the beginning matters. Our daughter Nora was born on a Thursday in early November. She was small and perfect, and the delivery was long and hard, and by the time it was over, I was exhausted in a way. I had never been exhausted before. The kind of exhaustion that lives in your bones. Marcus, my husband, was there for all of it. He held my hand and he cut the cord and he cried in the way that new fathers cry in hospital rooms, genuinely and openly. And I remember looking at him in those first hours and thinking that whatever had been difficult between us lately, whatever distance had been quietly growing, this had reset something. This had brought us back to the center. I was wrong about that, but I didn't know it yet. The distance I had noticed in the months before. Nora was born. I had attributed entirely to the stress of a first pregnancy. Marcus was working long hours. He was distracted. He was sometimes irritable in ways that were unlike him. But I was growing a human being and managing my own anxiety about becoming a parent, and I didn't have the bandwidth to investigate what was happening with him. I filed it away under later. I would address it later, after the baby came, when life had settled. Life did not settle. 3 weeks after Nora was born, I was up at 2 a.m. for a feeding, and Marcus's phone, which was on the nightstand on his side of the bed, lit up with a message. He was asleep. I wasn't. I saw the notification from across the room, and something in me, some quiet animal instinct, went very still. The name on the screen was a woman's name, a name I recognized as someone from his office, because he had mentioned her in passing. A few times over the past year, always casually, always in the context of work. The preview of the message showed only a few words, but the few words were enough. They were the kind of words you do not send to a colleague. They were the kind of words that have weight to them, history in them, a whole private language built between two people over time. I put Nora back down in her bassinet. I picked up his phone. He hadn't locked it because we had one of those married person arrangements where you don't lock your phones as a kind of passive display of having nothing to hide. The irony of that is not lost on me. I read for about 20 minutes. 4 months. The messages went back 4 months. To a weekend in July when he had told me he was going on a camping trip with his college friends. I remember that weekend clearly because I was 6 months pregnant and exhausted, and I had minded him going but told him it was fine. Go, you need time with your friends. I had spent that weekend alone reorganizing the nursery and watching old movies and eating cereal for dinner. He had spent it with her. I put the phone back exactly where it was. I went to the bathroom and I sat on the edge of the tub for a very long time. Nora started crying again, and I went and picked her up and fed her in the rocking chair in the dark, and I held her very close. And I said nothing and thought everything. Here's the decision I made in that rocking chair in the dark. I was not going to say a word yet. Not because I was afraid, not because I was in denial, but because I had just had a baby 3 weeks ago, and I was physically and hormonally and emotionally at my most depleted, and I just knew that if I tried to have this confrontation right now, I would not be at my best. I would be crying and shaking and barely coherent, and he would be able to frame whatever happened next in whatever way he chose. I needed time. I needed to be steadier. I needed to collect what I had before I spoke. What I did not anticipate was what he would do first. Sometime in those first few days after I found the messages, he must have sensed something shift in me. I was quieter. I was watching him differently. I was no longer meeting his eyes the same way, and maybe he felt the temperature change. Maybe he noticed something in my face that concerned him. Because very shortly after that, I started hearing things back from people that alarmed me. My mother-in-law called and asked, in her gentle and careful way, how I was really doing. She said Marcus had mentioned I was having a hard time adjusting. My neighbor stopped me on the driveway and said she'd heard I'd been struggling and offered to bring meals. My own sister called and asked if I had talked to my doctor about postpartum depression, because Marcus had reached out to her, privately, to express his concern. He had reached out to my sister, privately. I sat with that information and I felt something move in me. That was not grief and was not sadness. It was cold and it was clear, and it was the feeling of understanding exactly what was happening and exactly what I needed to do about it. He was building a narrative. Before I could tell my story, he was writing a different one. He was laying groundwork so that when I eventually said my husband is cheating on me, the people around me would already have been primed to hear it through a filter of poor Claire. She's not been well, she's not herself. You know how hard the postpartum period can be. He was going to make me a woman who was confused and emotional and not entirely reliable. He was going to make himself the long-suffering, patient, worried husband of a woman having a mental health crisis. And it was working. I went to my own doctor, not because I thought I needed to, but because I wanted documentation. I sat across from my physician and I told her what was happening in full, and she assessed me carefully and thoroughly. And at the end, she told me what I already knew. I was not experiencing postpartum depression. I was experiencing situational distress due to a significant life stressor, which is the clinical way of saying, my husband was cheating on me and telling everyone. I was unstable to cover it up, and that is enough to distress anyone. I asked her to document that assessment. She did. I went home and I kept being quiet. I kept watching. I started taking very careful note of everything. Every night he came home late. Every morning he spent an extra long time in the bathroom with his phone. Every weekend errand that took twice as long as it should have. I wrote things down in a notes app on my phone, dates and times and inconsistencies quietly and methodically, while also caring for a newborn and managing a household, and responding warmly to everyone who reached out with their concerned questions about my mental health. I want you to understand what that took. I want you to really sit with what it costs a woman to hold all of that at once, to be grieving and furious and strategizing, while also being a mother to a brand new human being, while also performing wellness for a community that had been told she was unwell. It was the most exhausting performance of my life, and it was a performance I chose because I needed it to hold long enough. His company Christmas party was in the second week of December. Nora was about 6 weeks old at that point. He had mentioned the party weeks earlier and suggested, with great tenderness, that maybe I should stay home and rest. That it would be a late night and loud and probably not ideal given everything. Given everything. That was the phrase he used. Given everything. As if my everything was the problem. I told him that sounded like a good idea. I told him I would stay home. I smiled at him in the way I had been smiling for weeks, and I watched him relax visibly with relief. Then I called my sister. I told her everything. All of it. From the phone at 2 a.m, to the narrative he had been building, to the doctor's appointment, to the notes I had been keeping, to the plan that had been forming slowly and solidly in my mind. She was silent for a long time when I finished. Then she said, "Tell me what you need. Not tell me what to do or let me fix this, or are you sure, just tell me what you need." That is the correct response, and I will love her forever for it. What I needed was a babysitter for Nora for a few hours on a Saturday night. She said yes immediately. I need to tell you about the receipts. In the weeks I had been quietly gathering, I had put together a very specific and organized collection of evidence. There were screenshots of the messages I had seen that first night, taken carefully and sent to my own email while he slept. There were the financial records I had started examining, charges that didn't belong in our life, a hotel stay, a restaurant I had never been to, a charge to a lingerie store that nothing in our marriage corresponded to. There was a photograph, which I will not describe in detail, that I had found accidentally while looking for something else on a shared cloud account he had apparently forgotten connected to his old laptop. There was the doctor's report. There was a printed timeline I had constructed, cross-referencing his stated whereabouts on specific dates with the financial records and the messages. I put all of it in a neat manila folder. I did my hair, and I wore the emerald green dress I had bought for our 5th anniversary, that he had always said was his favorite. I found a parking space in the garage, attached to his office building, and I walked in through the lobby and took the elevator to the 14th floor where the party was already well underway. He was across the room when I walked in. I saw him before he saw me. He was standing with a group of colleagues, laughing at something, completely at ease, a glass of wine in his hand, the most comfortable man in the room. She was there too. I recognized her from a company photo I had found online. She was standing close to the group, but not too close. She was wearing red. I watched the exact moment he saw me. It was, in purely observational terms, remarkable. The laugh stopped mid-breath. The glass paused halfway to his mouth. Something crossed his face that was too fast and too complicated to fully name. But the dominant color of it was fear. I smiled at him. I walked over to his group and I said hello to everyone pleasantly, and I let him introduce me as his wife, and I shook hands, and I asked polite questions about people's roles at the company, and I was warm and composed and completely present. His manager was there, a man named Robert who had known Marcus for over a decade and who had, I knew from things Marcus had said, a strong personal code about professional conduct. I had planned for Robert specifically. After a few minutes of easy conversation, I said, in a voice that was clear and calm and just loud enough for the small group to hear, that I actually had something I needed to share. I said I had debated whether this was the right moment, and I had decided that it was, because I believed in honesty, and I believed that the people in Marcus's professional life deserved the same honesty I had decided to give my own. I opened the manila folder. I didn't make a speech. I didn't perform emotion or raise my voice or create a scene in the dramatic sense. I simply presented the information I had gathered, clearly and specifically, and I let it exist in the room. I watched Robert's face. I watched the faces of the colleagues. I watched Marcus, who had gone the color of copy paper, and I watched her, who had gone very still in the way people go still when they understand that a situation has moved entirely beyond their control. I had one specific thing I wanted to say directly, and I said it calmly, and I said it once. I turned to Marcus and I said, I know what you have been telling people about me. I know the story you have been building. I have the doctor's assessment confirming my mental health is absolutely fine, and I would like everyone here tonight to understand the actual reason. I have been distressed these past several weeks. Then I closed the folder. I said I hoped everyone enjoyed the rest of their evening. I said goodbye to Robert by name. I turned and I walked back to the elevator, and I pressed the button and I went down to the lobby, and I walked to my car and I sat in the driver's seat, and I cried for about 10 minutes. Not sad crying, the other kind. The kind where something that has been compressed inside you for a very long time finally has permission to move. Then I drove to my sister's house and I held my daughter, and I did not speak to Marcus for 2 days. He came to me eventually with everything people come with in those moments. He was devastated, he said. He was sorry beyond what words could hold, he said. He wanted to fix it. He needed me to understand how much he loved us. He said her name was a mistake that had spiraled beyond his control. Said it the way people say things spiraled, when they mean I kept choosing this for months, but I'd prefer not to frame it that way. I listened to all of it. I had made my decision weeks before that party. The party wasn't about him at all, not really. It was about me. It was about making sure that before I walked out the door of that marriage, the record was straight, that my name was clean, that the story that existed in the world was the true one. We divorced 8 months later. I have Nora half the time, and she is now 2 years old. And she is the most extraordinary small person I have ever encountered. She has his eyes and my stubbornness and her own absolutely unique and ferocious personality that belongs entirely to herself. I am not bitter. I want to be clear about that. Bitterness is heavy, and I have a lot to carry already, and I do not have room for it. What I have instead is clarity. The absolute clean-edge clarity that comes when you stop pretending a thing is something other than what it is, and you deal with it directly, and you come out the other side still holding yourself together. He told everyone I was struggling. He was right about that part. I was struggling. I was struggling with the truth of who he was and the weight of what he had done and the question of what I was going to do about it. And then I figured out the answer. And I wore the green dress,